The transport ship shook violently as Marcus Reed felt the engines die beneath him. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel while alarms screamed their urgent warnings. He gripped the pilot's seat as the vessel began its uncontrolled descent toward the planet below. Through the view screen he could see the gray and purple landscape rushing up to meet him. This was Kithara Prime, one of the most dangerous worlds in known space. Marcus had been hauling mining equipment to the outer colonies when his ship's fusion drive suffered a catastrophic failure. The backup systems were failing one by one, and he knew he had minutes before impact. He strapped himself into the emergency crash seat and activated what remained of the ship's protective systems. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the rocky surface of the Death world filling his vision high above in orbit. The research vessel belonging to the Galactic Scientific Consortium detected the crash. Dr. Ylara pressed her three-fingered hands against the observation deck window as she watched the small transport ship streak across the planet's toxic atmosphere. Her large eyes reflected the orange glow of the ship's burning hull as it disappeared behind a mountain range. Commander Thox's crystalline form shifted colors from blue to concerned purple as he accessed the crash site data. His species communicated, partly through color changes, and the purple indicated serious worry. The crystalline officer had seen many crashes during his long career, but none on a world as hostile as Kithara Prime. Pilot Ren's thin frame moved quickly between the navigation controls as he tried to get a better view of the crash site. His Astran species was known for their quick movements and sharp sight, but even he struggled to penetrate the thick toxic clouds that covered the planet's surface. The three aliens had been conducting atmospheric studies when they detected the human ship's distress signal. Dr. Ylara reviewed her data files on Kithara Prime with growing concern. The planet's atmosphere contained deadly gases that could kill most known species within minutes. The gravity was 3 times the galactic standard, crushing for most life forms. Temperature swings ranged from burning hot during the day to freezing cold at night. Acid rain fell regularly, and the native predators were among the most aggressive ever documented. No species had ever survived more than 6 hours on the planet's surface without full environmental protection. Even their own research teams used heavily armored suits and backup life support systems when collecting samples. The longest any expedition had lasted was 8 hours before the hostile environment claimed their lives. Marcus woke up inside his crashed ship with blood trickling down his forehead. His head pounded and his ribs ached, but he was alive. Smoke filled the cabin, and he could hear the hiss of escaping gases from damaged systems. He unbuckled himself from the crash seat and stumbled toward the emergency supply locker. The ship's hull had cracked open in several places and toxic atmosphere was seeping inside. Marcus could taste the bitter metallic flavor in the air and feel his throat beginning to burn. He grabbed his emergency breathing mask, but the indicator showed the filter would only last 2 hours at most. Working quickly despite his injuries, Marcus gathered what supplies he could find. A basic toolkit, some emergency rations, a water recycler, medical supplies, and salvageable electronics filled his pack. The ship's communication array was completely destroyed, and the distress beacon was damaged but still functional. He activated it and hoped someone would eventually hear his signal. Through the cracked view screen, Marcus could see the alien landscape outside. Jagged purple rocks jutted up from the gray soil like broken teeth. Strange twisted plants grew in patches, their leaves seeming to move despite the lack of any visible wind. In the distance he could see what looked like caves carved into the base of a massive cliff face. Dr. Ylara watched the crash site through their ship's powerful sensors. She expected to detect the human's life signs failing within the first hour as the toxic atmosphere overwhelmed his system. Her species had evolved on a peaceful world with gentle conditions, and the thought of surviving on Kithara Prime filled her with dread. Commander Thox monitored the planet's dangerous conditions from his station. Seismic readings showed frequent groundquakes. Atmospheric scans revealed toxic gas concentrations that would dissolve most organic tissue. Weather patterns indicated an acid storm was approaching the crash site within hours. By all calculations, the human should already be dead, Marcus forced himself to focus despite the growing burn in his lungs. The breathing mask was helping, but he could feel the toxic air finding its way around the edges. He needed to create better protection fast, or he would be dead within the hour. Using his toolkit, he began dismantling parts of the ship's air recycling system. The aliens watched in surprise as life signs from the crash site remained stable. Dr. Yulara checked her instruments twice to make sure they were working correctly. According to everything they knew about biology and planetary conditions, the humans should have succumbed to respiratory failure by now. Marcus worked with steady hands, despite the poison burning his throat. He combined filter materials from the air recycling system with fabric from his clothing to create a better breathing mask. The design was crude, but it sealed better around his face and provided additional filtration layers. Testing his improved mask, Marcus found he could breathe easier, though the air still tasted terrible. His next priority was shelter. The ship's hull was too damaged to provide adequate protection, and the approaching storm would bring acid rain that could eat through metal. He began salvaging useful materials from the wreckage. Pieces of hull plating, insulation materials, power cells, and electronic components went into organized piles. Marcus had spent years working as a ship engineer, and he understood how systems functioned and how they could be repurposed. The aliens continued their observations as the first day passed. Every hour that the humans survived was unprecedented. Dr. Yulara began documenting everything she saw, knowing that this might be the first recorded case of unprotected survival on a Class X Deathworld. As night fell and temperatures began to drop toward lethal levels, Marcus was still alive and working. The aliens watched in growing amazement as the impossible continued to unfold on the deadly planet below. Marcus woke up shivering as the planet's cold night gave way to the first hints of dawn. His makeshift shelter had protected him from the worst of the temperature drop, but he could feel the chill deep in his bones. The breathing mask had worked through the night, though the filters were already showing signs of contamination from the toxic air. Dr. Yulara stared at her instruments in disbelief. The human life signs were not only still active, but showed he had slept for several hours. Her scientific training told her this was impossible. No known species could survive a night on Cathara Prime. Without environmental suits and heating systems, Marcus emerged from his crude shelter and surveyed his surroundings in the growing light. The acid storm had passed during the night, leaving strange mineral deposits on the rocks around his crash site. He noticed that some of these deposits seemed to generate small amounts of heat. His engineer mind immediately began working on how to use this discovery. Commander Thox reviewed the overnight sensor data with growing confusion. The readings showed the human had not only survived temperatures that should have frozen his bodily fluids, but had somehow maintained core body temperature throughout the night. The crystalline officer ran the calculations 3 times, but the results remained the same. Working quickly to stay warm, Marcus began expanding his shelter using pieces of his crashed ship's hull. He arranged the metal plates to form walls around a natural depression in the rocky ground. The design created a windbreak while allowing him to position the heat-generating mineral deposits for maximum warmth. His breathing mask needed attention, so Marcus spent time improving the filtration system. He discovered that certain fibers from his ship's insulation material seemed to neutralize some of the toxic compounds in the air. By layering these fibers with standard filters, he created a more effective breathing apparatus. Pilot Ren adjusted the ship's sensors to get better readings on the human's activities. His quick astron reflexes allowed him to track the rapid movements as Marcus worked on his shelter. The pilot had seen many species struggle with basic survival, but none had shown this level of systematic problem-solving. As the day progressed and temperatures began to rise, Marcus faced a new challenge. The same heating that had threatened to freeze him at night now threatened to cook him alive. He used salvaged reflective materials from his ship to create shade and redirect some of the intense heat away from his shelter. Dr. Yulara documented each adaptation with growing excitement. Her scientific background told her she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The human was not just surviving the hostile environment. but actively adapting to it in real time. Marcus noticed that the toxic gases seemed to flow in predictable patterns based on the landscape features. He used this observation to position air intake vents for his shelter in areas with lower concentrations of dangerous compounds. The engineering principles were basic, but the application showed an intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics that impressed even himself. By midday, Marcus had created a functioning shelter with basic environmental controls. He had redirected toxic gas flows to create a heating system for the coming night. The heat-generating minerals were incorporated into his walls to provide consistent warmth. His improved breathing system allowed him to work for hours without respiratory distress. Commander Thox found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about planetary classification systems. Their databases classified Kithara Prime as uninhabitable for all known life forms, yet here was a human not only surviving but improving his situation with each passing hour. Marcus began working on water collection systems as he noticed the way moisture condensed on certain materials during temperature changes. He fashioned collection surfaces from salvaged ship components and created a simple distillation system to purify the highly acidic precipitation that served as the planet's primary water source. The aliens watched as Marcus tested his water purification system and successfully produced drinkable water from the toxic rainfall. Dr. Ylara noted that the humans seemed to understand chemistry principles that had taken her species decades to develop through formal study. As afternoon approached, Marcus turned his attention to food preservation and storage. His emergency rations would not last more than a few days, so he began studying the local plant life to determine if any might be edible with proper preparation. He used his growing understanding of the planet's chemistry to identify potentially useful species. The research vessel continued its observations as Marcus systematically addressed each survival challenge. What should have been a struggle for basic existence had become an exercise in environmental engineering. The human was not just adapting to Kithara Prime, but actively modifying his immediate environment to make it more habitable. Marcus spent the rest of the day improving his shelter's structural integrity. He used principles of load distribution and stress management to create a framework that could withstand the planet's frequent groundquakes. The design incorporated flexibility while maintaining strength through careful placement of salvaged materials. Dr. Ylara realized she was witnessing the emergence of a new survival paradigm. Instead of trying to resist or endure the hostile environment, the human was learning to work with it. He used the planet's own dangerous features as tools rather than treating them only as threats. As the second night approached, Marcus had transformed his crash site into a functional living space. His shelter now included separate areas for sleeping, working, and storage. The environmental systems he had created would maintain breathable air and comfortable temperature throughout the coming night. Commander Thox prepared his report for Galactic Command, knowing that his superiors would find it difficult to believe a single human had survived 2 days on a planet that had killed entire research expeditions. More than survived, he had begun to thrive. The aliens settled in for another night of observations as Marcus made final adjustments to his systems. The impossible was becoming routine, and they began to wonder what other capabilities this remarkable species might possess. The human had already exceeded every prediction and shown abilities that challenged their understanding of biological limitations. Marcus checked his distress beacon one final time before resting. The signal was still broadcasting, though he had no way of knowing if anyone would receive it. For now he was alive and his situation was improving daily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he felt confident in his ability to meet them on this deadly world that was slowly becoming home. Marcus woke to the sound of something large moving outside his shelter. Through the gaps in his makeshift walls, he could see a massive shadow passing between the rocky outcroppings. The creature was bigger than his crashed ship and seemed to be investigating the crash site with obvious intelligence. Dr. Ylara felt her breathing quicken as their sensors identified the approaching life form. It was a razor maw, one of Kithara Prime's apex predators. The crystalline beast stood for meters tall with razor-sharp mineral growths covering its body like natural armor. Its mouth could open wide enough to swallow a small vehicle. Marcus remained perfectly still as he observed the creature through a small viewing port he had built into his shelter wall. The razor maw moved with surprising grace for something so large. Its 6 legs ended in claws that could slice through metal, and its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light in the dawn shadows. Commander, Thox accessed the files on razor maws with growing concern. These predators had destroyed 3 previous research expeditions that attempted to study Kithara Prime. Their crystalline hide could deflect most energy weapons, and their strength allowed them to tear through reinforced barriers like paper. The creature stopped directly in front of Marcus's shelter and began sniffing the air. Its massive head swayed back and forth as it tried to locate the source of the unfamiliar scents. Marcus could hear its breathing, a sound like wind rushing through mountain caves. Instead of cowering in fear, Marcus began studying the creature's behavior patterns. He noticed how it moved its head when investigating scents and how its eyes tracked movement. The engineer in him was already analyzing potential weaknesses and defensive strategies. Pilot, Ren watched from orbit as the razor maw began circling the shelter. His Astran instincts screamed danger, but he found himself fascinated by the human's calm response. Most species would have panicked or attempted to flee by now. Marcus quietly gathered materials to create weapons while keeping the creature under observation. He selected pieces of metal from his ship's hull that could be sharpened and weighted for throwing. His toolkit provided the means to create crude but effective weapons from salvaged components. The razor maw seemed to grow tired of its investigation and moved away from the shelter toward a cluster of the strange plants that grew nearby. Marcus used this opportunity to study how the creature interacted with its environment. He noted which plants it avoided and which ones it consumed. Dr. Yalara documented the creature's behavior while simultaneously tracking the human's response. She was amazed to see that Marcus showed no signs of the panic responses common to most species when facing deadly predators. Instead, his vital signs indicated focused concentration. Marcus spent the morning hours creating improvised weapons and defensive positions around his shelter. He sharpened metal fragments into spear points and fashioned simple throwing weapons. More importantly, he began modifying his shelter's design to include multiple escape routes and defensive firing positions. The razor maw returned near midday, this time approaching the shelter more directly. Its behavior suggested increased interest in whatever was inside the strange structure that had appeared in its territory. The creature's movements became more aggressive as it tested the barriers Marcus had constructed. Commander Thox prepared to document another casualty as the massive predator began probing the shelter's defenses. Previous encounters with razor maws had ended quickly and violently. No known species had ever successfully defended against these apex predators without heavy weapons and armor. Marcus watched as the creature began testing his barriers with increasing force. One swipe of its claws left deep gouges in the metal plating he had used for walls. He realized that purely defensive strategies would not be enough against such a powerful opponent. The creature's first real attack came without warning. The razor maw slammed its full weight against the shelter wall, buckling the metal and creating a gap large enough for its massive claws to reach through. Marcus rolled away from the breach and grabbed his improvised weapons. Dr. Yalara watched in horror as the human shelter began to collapse under the creature's assault. According to all their data, this should be the end of the unprecedented survival story. No unprotected individual had ever faced a razor maw and lived to document the encounter. Instead of fleeing, Marcus began his counterattack. He used his knowledge of the creature's behavior patterns to predict its movements and position himself advantageously. His first thrown spear struck the razor maw in what appeared to be a sensitive area near its eyes, causing it to rear back in surprise. The creature's roar shook the rocky ground as it realized its prey was fighting back. Most creatures on Kithara Prime either fled from razor maws or were consumed quickly. This new opponent was neither running nor dying as expected. Marcus used the shelter's layout to his advantage, leading the creature into positions where its size worked against it. The narrow spaces between rock formations limited the Razor Maw's ability to use its full strength while giving Marcus room to maneuver and strike at vulnerable points. Pilot Ren found himself gripping his navigation controls as he watched the impossible battle unfold below. The human was not just surviving an encounter with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, but actually driving it back through tactical positioning and improvised weapons. The turning point came when Marcus managed to strike the creature's rear leg joint with a sharpened piece of ship hull. The Razor Maw stumbled and became entangled in the defensive barriers Marcus had constructed around his shelter. This gave him the opportunity to land several more strikes before the creature could free itself, rather than press his attack. Marcus showed remarkable tactical restraint. He backed away to a defensive position and allowed the injured Razor Maw to retreat. The creature limped away from the shelter area, clearly deciding that this particular prey was more trouble than it was. Dr. Ylara stared at her instruments in amazement as the life signs of both the human and the Razor Maw separated. The human had not only survived the encounter, but had actually won the confrontation through superior tactics and adaptability. Commander Thox found himself questioning every assumption his species had made about combat effectiveness and survival capabilities. The human had defeated one of the galaxy's most feared predators using nothing but salvaged materials and tactical intelligence. Marcus spent the rest of the day repairing and improving his shelter defenses. The encounter had taught him valuable lessons about the local predators and how to deal with future threats. He incorporated these lessons into stronger barriers and better weapon systems. The aliens continued their observations with newfound respect for the humans' capabilities. What they had witnessed was beyond their understanding of biological limitations and survival instincts. Marcus had not just endured Kithara Prime, but had proven himself as its newest apex predator. By the 5th day, Marcus had transformed his crash site into something that resembled a small settlement rather than a survival shelter. His original crude barriers had evolved into a multi-room complex with distinct areas for different functions. The main shelter now included a workshop, sleeping quarters, storage areas, and even a primitive laboratory space. Dr. Ylara reviewed her accumulated data with growing disbelief. Every scientific model her species had developed suggested that Kithara Prime should have killed the human within hours. Instead, she was documenting the establishment of what appeared to be a thriving outpost on one of the most hostile worlds in known space. Marcus had solved the water problem completely through his improved purification systems. He could now process the acidic rainfall into clean drinking water faster than he could consume it. The excess was stored in containers made from salvaged ship components, giving him a reliable water supply that could last weeks. The smaller native creatures had begun approaching his settlement regularly. Marcus had discovered that many of them were actually quite intelligent and responded well to consistent feeding schedules. He shared small portions of his emergency rations with them and found that they began bringing him interesting objects. From around the crash site, Commander Thox watched as one of the small six-legged creatures delivered what appeared to be a rare mineral sample to the human's workshop area. The crystalline officer had studied these creatures for months and never seen them interact positively with any other species. They typically avoided larger life forms or attacked if cornered. Marcus had begun a systematic study of the local ecology and geology. His workshop area contained carefully organized samples of plants, minerals, and other materials he had collected from the surrounding area. Through trial and error, he was learning which substances could be useful for construction, fuel, or even food preparation. The Humans Greenhouse Project fascinated Dr. Ylara most of all. Marcus had created a sealed growing environment using transparent materials salvaged from his ship's viewports. Inside this protected space, he was attempting to grow food plants, using modified soil chemistry and carefully controlled atmospheric conditions. His first attempts at agriculture were showing promising results. The emergency seeds from his ship's supplies were sprouting in soil he had treated with minerals found around the crash site. The growing plants seemed healthy despite the alien environment, suggesting that Marcus understood principles of biochemistry. That impressed even the trained XENO guest. Pilot Ren observed the expanding settlement from orbit and marveled at the organizational skills the human displayed. Every addition to the complex served multiple purposes and fitted into an overall design that maximized efficiency while maintaining defensive capabilities. The layout showed strategic thinking that would impress military planners. Marcus had begun mining operations in a small way, extracting useful metals and minerals from the rich deposits that Cathara Prime's geological activity had created. He used heat from the planet's thermal vents to forge simple tools and improve his existing equipment. The workshop area now contained an impressive array of handmade implements. The defensive systems around his settlement had evolved far beyond simple barriers. Marcus had redirected some of the toxic gas flows to create protective barriers that would deter predators while remaining safe for him to cross using his improved breathing equipment. The engineering required showed an intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics and chemistry. Dr. Yalara noted that the humans seemed to view every challenge as an engineering problem waiting for a solution. When acid rain threatened his growing plants, he designed better protective covers. When ground tremors damaged his structures, he developed flexible mounting systems that could absorb the shock. Marcus had established regular routines that maximized his productivity while maintaining his health in the hostile environment. His daily schedule included equipment maintenance, sample collection, construction projects, and even leisure time spent observing the local wildlife. The psychological resilience he displayed was as impressive as his technical skills. The small creatures that frequented his settlement had become an informal early warning system. Marcus learned to read their behavior patterns and could predict approaching weather changes or larger predators based on how his animal neighbors acted. This gave him valuable time to prepare for various threats. Commander Thox found himself studying the humans' construction techniques with professional interest. The buildings showed remarkable efficiency in their use of materials and energy. Load-bearing walls incorporated the planet's natural rock formations, while flexible joints allowed the structures to survive frequent seismic activity. Marcus had solved the food problem through multiple approaches. His greenhouse was producing fresh vegetables, while his study of local plants had identified several species that could be made edible with proper preparation. He had also learned to preserve and store food using the planet's natural temperature variations. The water management system had grown into a complex network that collected, purified, and distributed clean water throughout the settlement. Marcus used gravity feed systems and simple pumps made from salvaged components to move water where it was needed. The engineering was elegant in its simplicity and effectiveness. Dr. Yalara documented the humans' waste management solutions with scientific appreciation. Marcus had created closed-loop systems that recycled organic waste into fertilizer for his plants, while safely disposing of toxic materials in ways that would not contaminate his water supply or attract dangerous scavengers. The power systems Marcus had developed used multiple energy sources, including thermal, mechanical, and even chemical reactions. He had learned to harness the planet's natural energy flows and convert them into useful work through ingenious mechanical devices built from ship components. Pilot Ren watched as Marcus began what appeared to be surveying work, mapping the area around his settlement and identifying resources for future expansion. The human was no longer just surviving on Cathara Prime, but actively planning for long-term habitation of the hostile world. The aliens realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Marcus had not simply adapted to survive on a death world, but had actually begun to civilize it. His settlement represented the first successful colonization of a Class X hostile environment by a single individual using only basic tools and salvaged materials. Marcus ended each day by updating his notes and observations about the planet's conditions and his ongoing projects. He was methodically documenting everything he learned about Cathara Prime, creating a database of information that could help future human settlers. His approach suggested confidence that others of his species would eventually join him on this Remote World, the research vessel continued its observations as Marcus demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption the galactic community had made about survival limitations and environmental adaptation. The impossible had become routine, and the aliens began to wonder what other surprises this remarkable species might reveal. On the 8th day, Marcus detected the familiar hum of fusion engines approaching through Cathara Prime's toxic atmosphere. His distress beacon had finally reached a human rescue ship, and they were coming to retrieve him. He felt a mixture of relief and sadness as he prepared to leave the settlement he had worked so hard to build. The rescue ship descended through the poisonous clouds with practiced ease, its pilot showing none of the concern that had marked the alien observers throughout the week. The humans clearly possessed technology and techniques for operating in hostile environments that the galactic community had not encountered before. Dr. Ylara watched the rescue operation with intense scientific interest. She wanted to study how the human rescuers would react to the impossible survival story they were about to discover. According to all their models, they should find only remains and wreckage on the planet's deadly surface. Captain Lee emerged from the rescue ship, wearing standard environmental gear, and immediately began examining Marcus's settlement with professional appreciation rather than amazement. Her reaction suggested that while impressive, this level of survival capability was not unprecedented among humans. Marcus greeted his rescuers with casual confidence, treating his week-long survival on a death world as challenging but manageable work. He gave them a quick tour of his settlement, pointing out the various systems he had developed and explaining how each component functioned within the larger design. The rescue team examined Marcus's engineering work with the same professional interest they might show when inspecting any well-designed facility. Engineer Rodriguez particularly admired the water purification systems, while Medic Thompson was impressed by the greenhouse and food production capabilities. Commander Fox listened to the human conversations through their monitoring equipment and found their casual attitude more shocking than anything else he had witnessed. The humans discussed Marcus's achievements as impressive engineering rather than miraculous survival against impossible odds. Captain Lee asked Marcus about his plans for the settlement, suggesting it could serve as a useful research station or emergency shelter for future expeditions to Cathara Prime. The conversation implied that humans regularly operated on worlds that the galactic community considered completely uninhabitable. Marcus spent time showing his rescuers the detailed notes and samples he had collected during his stay. His documentation would allow other humans to establish themselves on Cathara Prime much more quickly by learning from his trial and error experiences with the planet's unique challenges. Dr. Ylara realized that the humans were already planning to return to Cathara Prime not as desperate survivors but as colonists and researchers. They discussed the world's potential resources and strategic value as if its deadly environment was merely another engineering challenge to overcome. The rescue team helped Marcus gather his most important equipment and samples while leaving his settlement structures intact. They treated the buildings as useful infrastructure rather than desperate survival shelters, suggesting they expected other humans to use the facilities in the future. Pilot Wren observed the human ship's preparation for departure and noted their complete confidence in operating within Cathara Prime's hostile environment. Their technology seemed designed specifically for working on worlds that other species would consider uninhabitable death traps. As the rescue ship prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look at his settlement through the viewports. He had spent only 8 days on Cathara Prime, but had managed to establish a foothold for his species on a world that had defeated every previous attempt at exploration or colonization. Captain Lee filed her mission report while the ship climbed away from the planet's surface. She noted Marcus's successful survival and the potential value of his settlement for future operations. Her tone suggested this was routine documentation rather than a record of unprecedented achievement. Dr. Ylara began composing her final report to the Galactic Scientific Consortium, knowing that her superiors would find it difficult to accept. She had documented the first successful individual colonization of a Class X death world, accomplished by a human using only basic tools and salvaged materials. The alien research vessel remained in orbit around Cathara Prime as the human rescue ship departed. Below them, Marcus's abandoned settlement stood as proof that the impossible could become routine when approached with sufficient determination and engineering skill. Commander Thox reviewed all the data they had collected during their week of observations. Every measurement and recording supported the same incredible conclusion. A single human had not only survived on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, but had actually begun the process of making it habitable. Dr. Yalara's final log entry recommended a complete revision of the galactic threat assessment protocols. Any species capable of what they had witnessed should be classified not just as survivors, but as a transformative force capable of adapting any environment to their needs. The research team prepared to return to Galactic Command with their findings, knowing they carried documentation of capabilities that would challenge every assumption about biological limitations and environmental adaptation. The humans had revealed themselves as something entirely new in the galaxy's long history. Pilot Ren took one last look at Cathara Prime before engaging the faster-than-light drive. The planet looked the same from orbit, but he knew that everything had changed. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a death world had been tamed by a single individual armed with nothing but determination and ingenuity. As their ship entered hyperspace, the aliens carried with them the knowledge that the galaxy contained a species unlike any they had ever encountered. The humans were not just another intelligent race struggling to survive in a hostile universe, but something far more significant. Marcus's settlement remained on Cathara Prime's surface, a testament to human capability and a promise of things to come. The structures he had built would serve as the foundation for future human colonies on worlds that other species would never dare to approach. The impossible had become possible through human determination, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Marcus Reed had proven that death worlds were only deadly to those who lacked the will and skill to conquer them, opening infinite possibilities for his remarkable species.